Hey everybody, it is Jordan from Wednesday Night Warhammer. Today I've got 5 more tips that I think Tyranid players should know when approaching the game of Warhammer 40,000. Some of these tips are actually tips that I am trying to incorporate more into my own gameplay. So things that I'm working on, and some of these tips even can translate to other factions besides just Tyranids. So without further ado, let's get into our first tip. First tip of the day is using and creating tokens for your Tyranid abilities. Imagine it things that help your gameplay. So first up, obviously the Tyranids we have tokens for the Neuroloids, which come from the Neurotyrant, and this is going to pass out synapse 18 inches. Use them. They're very helpful for your opponent as well as yourself to understand which units can go venture out a little bit further and still be within synapse. And also, it's going to help your opponent establish the game state and make sure that they understand which units are under the synapse buff, even if they are outside of that 6 inches. They're also very cute. They're very fun to use. Just put them next to your gargoyles or whatever. And it's just going to be much clearer for everybody who's playing the game, understanding what's under synapse and what is not. A little trick to help yourself remember to use the Neurotyrant's ability, because I will admit, oftentimes I even forget, even though it's very obvious what units I would like to have under synapse, is to place your Neuroloids maybe near the end of your opponent's turn, or whatever, when you're about to go into your turn. Place your Neuroloids on top of your secondary deck. This will allow you to, right before you draw the card, you look at the token and say, oh, I need to put my Neuroloid somewhere. It's just a little helpful reminder that I steal that from, I used to play a lot of Magic the Gathering, and I would do stuff like that, like put a coin on top of my deck to remember my triggers or whatever. And I think this translates pretty well to Warhammer as well. Just put something on top of your secondary deck to remind yourself of a certain command phase ability. So that can translate into other things besides the Neurotyrant buff. But good idea. And then next, create a token for your Hive Tyrant and Tyrant effects. And this is talking about the Will of the Hive Mind ability with the free strats. Just to help yourself plan around your CP. Yes, we get to do it both each turn. However, sometimes there's a lot that's going on, and sometimes you can CP reroll in your shooting phase or something like that. And then maybe you forget in your fight phase and you are actually trying to save that or something. So if you create a token to use for your Hive Tyrant, I feel like that's a good idea to do that. I'm working on creating an adrenal gland token that I can just stick to my Hive Tyrant's back. I'm either going to magnetize it or just use like a little bit of sticky tack to put it right on its back. So when I use its ability, I'm just going to take the adrenal gland token off, set it aside, maybe put it on its base. And then at the start of each turn, hopefully I can put it back on there to signify that his ability has regenerated. In the very same vein, with the Tyrant effects blanking a save, I think it would be very helpful for you as well as your opponent to understand when it has used that ability, or when it is still up. So I'm probably going to do another adrenal gland for this, and just put it on its thigh or something and take it off once it's used, or just so it's a little bit more clear. Other things you can do, my buddy Kyle, he has used a rubber band and he's just put it on his flying Hive Tyrant every single turn, and he just takes it off when it's used. And I think that's pretty good too. It's nothing flashy, nothing fancy, but it does signify to your opponent that your Hive Tyrant has the ability to use that stratagem reduction ability, and it also reminds you when you've done it, just to keep the game state fair and continued on. Our second tip of the day is the squiggly takeover. Careful. We got the Neurotyrant, and honestly, this might be just a little letter to myself, but I think probably other Tyranid players do this. I think we need to be more aggressive with our Neurotyrants. I think there is a standard rate of play where you put the Neurotyrant in the back, where he is super, super, super safe, and then he passes out Synapse, and then oftentimes he's not even able to activate his Flamer the entire game, which I think is a misnomer. I think that he should be placed more up front where the rest of your units are. He will still be able to pass out the synapse buff, um, and he'll be able to use your flamer. But let's go through each of these bullet points. First up, don't overdo it. Like, of course, don't shoot him straight up in the middle of the field where your opponent's entire army can activate into him and just shoot everything. Obviously, that's not what I'm telling you to do. Make sure that you're doing this with a grain of caution. But some little arguments for us to push up our Neurotyrant is, first up, if you think about it, like once Shadows is popped, it's it's a little bit less useful. Like, yes, we should baby the Neurotyrant a little bit just to make sure that Shadows in the Warp gets that -1 leadership debuff for everything. But after that, yeah, he's going to pass out Synapse and everything. But besides that, I find myself turns 3, 4, and 5. The things that are going to be in Synapse are going to be in Synapse, and if you're able to position correctly, by that time you're probably out of units or getting close to out of units that you are throwing out that maybe need that long distance Synapse buff. The rest of your army is kind of castled together or has delegated to different parts of the table where they're going to be outside of 18 inches regardless. And honestly, maybe your army could use a strength 5 AP1 2 damage ignore cover flamer as opposed to a 105 point model that is sitting in the back and not really doing anything. So talking about that, if you're aggressive with him, it actually takes a strong activation from your opponent in order to kill this Neurotyrant. He's T8, 9 wounds, 4 invul. That is just hard to shift on its own. It's a much better Rhino if you think about it, and it's your opponent is actually going to have to dedicate something pretty heavy into taking this guy out. So put him up there. If your opponent is shooting a bunch of anti-tank guns into your Neurotyrant, odds are they're not shooting a bunch of anti-tank guns into your Tyrannofex or your Exocrine or your Haruspex or whatever that may be that you also have on the table. So there you go. I also talked about it a little bit more, these last 2 bullet points in the beginning of this. It has a good flamer. Use it. The 2d6 strength 5 AP1 2 damage is phenomenal Overwatch threat for things like scouts, things like just Space Marine bodies or any kind of like gribbly guys that are wanting to screen. If you're able to use this as a screen clearer instead of your actual guns, that's phenomenal. That's great. And then also, to just further this home, if you're further up the field, that means you're further up in Synapse. That 18-inch range is really, really good, but 18 inches runs out eventually. Traditionally after 18 inches, so if your Neurotyrant is positioning forward within your castle, then that means it can reach out that Synapse buff to maybe some Carnifexes or something that are trundling up the field, or maybe give another boost to Synapse to Gargoyles or Hormagaunts or something that is also threatening your opponent's backfield. Third tip of the day already, and these tips aren't necessarily in any order or anything, but this tip is honestly one of the things that I feel like I'm most excited to talk about, and probably one of the things that is really easily translated into any other faction in the game as well. It's deployment. So there's 2 different factors to this part that I always make sure I go over. Honestly, deployment can be one of the most challenging phases in the game, even before the game starts. I have lost games and I have won games because of deployment. So if you are not careful with your deployment, you're not understanding where things need to go, then it can set you up for an unsuccessful game. So first, before you put anything down, do this first. Ask these questions. Ask them to your opponent. Do you have any infiltrators? Do you have any scouts? What is your first turn threat range? Okay. The answers to these 3 questions are really going to be able to dictate how the deployment wars, per se, go about for the stage of the game. If they have infiltrators, if they have scouts, and if they have a scary first turn threat range, something like World Eaters, then that should and it will dictate how you deploy out your game. Okay, so next step. After you've asked those questions, do these things. If they have infiltrators, you need to screen out your infiltrators. When the deployment roll off, then you're probably going to have to dedicate a lictor in order to push back your opponent's scouts or commandos or whatever they may be trying to cover the table. All right. Oh, little aside, if you're a Space Marine player, don't automatically always put infiltrators in the backfield. See if they can do something else sometimes. I don't know. But anyways, if you are able to put your lictor out, that's a 9-inch bubble of where they are not going to be able to put their stuff out. Okay. So if you screen them like that, then you're able to get a little bit of a board advantage with your lictor where they're not able to put their scouts and maybe trap you in the deployment zone. Ah, next up, if maybe they don't have a lot of infiltrators, but they have scout units, hold on to your infiltrates until the end. So this is going into armies such as World Eaters, some Imperial Guard. They're able to scout with their chimeras or whatever. Um, hold on to your lictors or hold on to your infiltrate units until the very end. And if you are able to do that, wait to deploy them until you know where their scout units are going to go. Okay. So if they put their scout units, they put their avocado out, all you need to do is just put your lictor 9 inches away directly in front of those scouting units. And then they're really not going to be able to scout up and get the board advantage that normally scout units are going to get. They're either going to have to move backwards, they're either going to have to move to the side, but they're certainly not going to position where their first choice would be. Right. And that's because scouting, when you finish your scout, you have to remain 9 inches outside of your opponent's deployment zone, as well as 9 inches away from enemy models. So if I just put my infiltrate 9 inches right in front of your scouting unit, typically you're not going to be able to move anything forward. Easy peasy. And then, so if we're in a really, really good place and they don't have any scout units, they don't have any infiltrators, which would be wild, but um, then we come to this phase of the game: deploy the units that don't matter first. All right. And that means that these units are just going to be where they are, and they're not, like, you placing these units down doesn't really change the impact of the game or the flow of where units need to go. So I'll give you an example about how I deploy these units. I always have 3 to 4 units that don't really matter where I'm going to put them. First up is Biovore. Biovore is going to go as far back as he can on your home objective 98% of any of your games that you ever play. That's just what he does. He does a great job of holding your backfield objective and still contributing to the game through his indirect or through his spore mine spawn. So if you put him on the very back of your objective as your first drop, it doesn't give your opponent any information, and it's just kind of what happens. Okay. Then your opponent drops something, sure. Then next up, what I normally do is I put my Raveners in an arc behind my Biovore just to ensure that there's no way that they can deep strike in my back corner of the battlefield. Sometimes I will, put them to the side of the table to just get a better screening bubble. Even though deep strikes don't happen turn one, it's a little peace of mind knowing that I don't really need to move anything in order to ensure that deep strikes are not going to happen. In addition, the Raveners get to uppy downy every single turn. So where they are in turn one is not really going to matter because they can just go back into deep strike and then I can put them somewhere else. Then third, I normally put something like the Neurotyrant. I know we just talked about being more aggressive with the Neurotyrant, but the main contributions of the Neurotyrant is going to be that 18-inch synapse tag, and your Neurotyrant is going to be able to do that from pretty much anywhere in your deployment zone to units that are going to want it. As long as you just try a little bit in order to make that happen, he doesn't really matter. And then from there, then you can start to build your castle and try and pull out key units from your opponent to deploy to understand where to put your exocrines, your Maliceptors, Tyrannopexes, etc. I feel like if you really dictate the flow of deployment and like that, you can set yourself for a good, successful flow of the game, even from the deployment zone. Then last but certainly not least, always allow yourself at least 1 to 2 shooting threats that you can put into reserves. So I have kind of gotten into a habit of at least placing 1 exocrine in reserves, and then depending on the army that I'm facing against, 1 of my 2 Tyrannopexes as well, because then this is going to allow me to get some really cool angles that normally would not happen. And it kind of keeps your opponent on their toes as well, because yes, the things that are on the battlefield can't reach you, but certainly if I put down an exocrine, he will be able to see you. In addition, a really, really cool thing that you can also do is you can rapid ingress an exocrine or rapid ingress a Tyrannifex and just put it directly in line of sight of something that you know is not going to be charging or moving anymore. And in that way, on your turn, it stayed stationary. It gets the +1 to its shooting, and it just can light whatever that is up. Could be a cool idea. Tip number 4 is the Tyranid trade wars. No, I'm not talking about the actual plot to Star Wars Episode 1 Phantom Menace. Man, 12-year-old me had no idea it was about trade wars or anything. I just like lightsabers and stuff. But so this is where I think Tyranids, you really need to kind of plan out your game plan, and also other factions as well, is you want to initiate trade wars. And what I'm talking about in trade wars, I've kind of drawn up a beautiful diagram here that I'm sure you're loving. A trade war is I'm going to put my gargoyles on a point, right? Then you're going to send something out, hopefully Magnus, hopefully a really important piece or unit to clear up my gargoyles. And then I'm going to be able to activate my exocrine or my gene stealers or an important hard-hitting unit from my army in order to take out that unit that you have placed on the center. So essentially, you have given up your Magnus or whatever to kill my gargoyles, which I'm mildly sad about, but then I kill your Magnus with whatever I send out there, essentially. So basically, you've given up your Magnus for my gargoyles, and I've killed your Magnus with my gene stealers. So that would be a trade war. And in that scenario, the Tyranids would absolutely win the trade war. So the reasons why I think that it is very important to take these into effect, or rather why Tyranids, I believe, are pretty good at this, is Tyranids have efficient, low-cost units. You have gargoyles, you have hormigons, you have lictors, you have pyrovores. All of those units are very relatively cheap. They're below 100 points, but the main thing that actually matters is they are 1 OC at least. So that means they can hold objectives. So if you put them out on an objective, your opponent is either going to do two things. One, say, okay, well, I guess you're scoring that objective. Or they're going to say, I need to dedicate a unit to clear you off that objective to make sure that you do not score that high on primary because of that unit. If they choose number 1, amazing. Congratulations on scoring extra primary. If they choose number 2, you need to make sure that you are set up with a stronger unit that is able to move out and counterpunch and take out that threat. Okay? So that's kind of like trapping your opponents into committing units to clear your screens or your less useful units. You are either gaining more primary or you are going to kill a more valuable unit from your opponent. When you are doing this, however, it is very important that you dedicate and you position these units in a way where your opponent cannot charge or cannot move in a way that they can hide on the objectives, because that would be very, very, very bad if they are able to kill your unit, take you off the objective, and then you are not able to counterpunch. So when you are setting up these counterpunches, please understand if your opponent has any like 6-inch consolidates or if they have any other movement shenanigans that can deter you from doing this, because it would feel really bad for you to send your unit out there, no matter how efficient or cheap it is, and for you to basically give it up for free. So make sure you don't do that. And then counterattack and profit. If I, like in this Dreamboat Christmas Land fairy tale scenario, I'm killing Magnus for gargoyles, I'll do that. I'll do that any day. So make sure you are initiating these trade wars, initiating these, the flow of the game in a way where it is going to benefit your army and your points, obviously. And then the last bullet point is kind of just a really good rule of thumb to have in any game that you're playing with any faction, is always give too little or too much, not just enough. The Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You don't want your porridge to be the baby bear or whatever it is, okay? You do not want your porridge to be perfectly ripe for your opponent to eat. You want to send too many threats into the field so that they have to pick and choose, and then the next turn you can punch again and do a devastating blow to your opponent. Or you want to make your opponent overcommit into something like gargoyles for this instance, or lictors or pyrovores. So then the following turn, you can really set up a devastating coward punch and punish your opponent for committing too much. Yeah, I apologize. It's not the fifth tip. It is me shilling for a moment. But something really exciting, just like Gaunt's, the subs are multiplying. We are super, super grateful for all of the incredible support we've been receiving in the past 2 months. The growth has been insane. And we're really trying to up the ante and make better content for all of these new people that have joined the channel. Um, so it's only getting better. So if you haven't subscribed, now would be a great time. Every single week, we have fun and competitive live streams every Wednesday night, as our title suggests. It's just always a great time. You know, we bring in guests, and we always make sure that we're either playing lists that are close to the meta or lists that are very fun to watch and interact with. We do cool and free giveaways. We just had a streamathon where we gave away some dice. We gave away a unit of a member's choice. I think we gave away a Chaos Rhino. It was super sweet. We're going to be doing more of those in the future. I think coming up near the holidays, we're going to be giving away one of those battle boxes. I think it's going to be the Dark Angels one, but we haven't 100% confirmed that yet. So be on the lookout for that. All you have to do is just join our Discord, and then you'll have access to those giveaways, and then there'll be other opportunities to enhance your chances at winning those giveaways. In addition, just like this video you're watching now, we're going to have weekly tactics videos. It's almost always NIDS. Sometimes I dabble in other things that guests want to talk about, and we can do things like that. We've done a bunch of Imperial Agent stuff. Always open to new ideas, you know, so stick around and see what we're talking about. And then last, but certainly not least, help us reach 3K. It just feels like a month ago we reached 2K, but you know, before long, I think we really are going to be knocking on the door of 3,000 subscribers. And our goal is to reach that before January 1st, 2025. So if you would be willing, if you want to help us reach that goal and come along with this incredible journey here at Wednesday Night Warhammer, come on in. Okay, for real, the fifth tip of the day. Again, these weren't in any order, but I think this tip is pretty cool too. Charge your gribblies. That's the Hormagaunts, the Termagants, and the Gargoyles. Charge these battle line units into things. Trust me, and I'll convince you right now. Okay, first step, do it. Don't be scared, of course. Always charge, right? Definitely don't. But if you think about it, charging a unit can easily give an 8-inch movement, okay? Because you're going to roll at least 2 1s, so that's 2 inches. Then you're going to pile in 3 inches, that would be 5. And then if you consolidate, then that's another 3 inches for 8 inches. So if you're able to use that movement in a way that benefits you, you know, whether you're scoring engaged on fronts, whether you're taking primary, you can really, really put that to your advantage. It's a little bit more difficult in 10th edition than it was in 9th edition to do that, but there's still a lot of really finagly things that you can do in the charge phase to benefit your score. Next up a little bit is just to forcing units to fall back or have to kill gribblies effectively kills them for a turn or removes them for a turn. Because if they're having to kill your 65-point unit Hormagaunt squad and their crisis battle suits or something, then they're not shooting at your important things. They're not shooting at your Gene Stealers or Warriors or whatever you are running at this time, you know? So if you are able to move up your Hormagaunts or your Gargoyles, even your Termagants, charge them, tie them up for a turn, make it so that they're either having to fall back or just shoot directly into combat, then I definitely think that is a win for sure. Before you do this, make sure the unit doesn't consistently kill your unit, all right? I do not think that you should be doing this tactic and charging into 10 Khorne Berserkers. Please do not. Just move your Gribbly units an inch away from them so that they just have to stare them in the face for a turn, all right? So make sure that you are doing this. I think it's okay sometimes to be aggressive with it, but do a little bit of math before you commit into a move like this so that you understand that you are going to be on the positive side of this kind of trade war. And that kind of leads me to my last bullet point is don't be scared, but be wary, you know? Warhammer is a game all about probabilities and a little bit of math, unfortunately, if you're not a fan of that. So make sure that the math is always in your favor and make sure that you understand where that math is coming from, what is the average that is going to happen, whether you're dedicating your Gargoyle squad to tying up a bunch of guardsmen, or if you're dedicating them to tie up an orc truck or a rhino or something. I'll let you in on a secret, and it might be surprising, but If your opponent's unit does not have 10 attacks, they cannot kill 10 models. Surprising, right? I know, I know. All right, everybody, thank you again for hanging out with me for another tactics video this week. If you appreciate this kind of content, if you get anything out of it, please consider subscribing, giving us a like, giving us a comment, sharing your ideas with us. We're always looking to grow, and I'd love to hear what the people in the comments have to say about Tyranids or just Warhammer in general. All right, everybody, thanks again for hanging. I'll see you Wednesday.